Hi everyone, welcome to week 5 of ECO204. For this week we're going to be looking at government failure, tariffs and quotas, and international trade. You're going to be reading chapters 12, 13, 14, and 15 this week. For chapter 12 we're going to be looking at features of the demand for labor. When we look at the demand for labor, we're looking at household purchases of goods and services and how they supply those various goods and services. You're going to have two different types of markets. You're going to have the product market and you're going to have the resource market. When we look at the product market, buyers and sellers exchange goods and services. In the resource market, buyers and sellers exchange the resources or the factors of production. When you look at this graph, we've had this graph before, we're connecting the households and the firms together. We supply the factors of production. Firms give us factor payments. We supply products to firms. We supply money. They supply goods and services. There's some different features to the demand for labor. The demand for labor is based off of a couple different things. The first thing the demand of labor is based off of is how independent and how technology influences growth. You'll notice that technology is very important for the demand for labor. As people are more productive or firms are more productive, they're going to want to hire more workers. The second one is derived demand. The derived demand is based off of what people want. The more people want a product, the higher the demand, which will increase the availability of that, and we need to hire more workers. And the other one's dealing with productivity. When workers are more productive, firms will want to hire more workers, and when firms want to hire more workers, the demand for labor will increase. The demand for labor is looking at this concept of the marginal revenue product, which is the amount that an additional unit of labor adds to the firm's total revenue. So how much additional revenue does a worker add to the total output of the firm? When we try to calculate this, it's the additional revenue received from adding an additional worker. Here's the demand curve for the demand for labor. You'll notice it's based off of the marginal revenue product. Now the supply of labor is something different. Supply of labor is dealing with the employees, and when you look at the supply of labor, employees are willing and wanting and able to work at a higher price or higher wage than compared as before. When we look at this trade-off, you'll see that individuals will substitute increased consumptions of goods and services for higher wages in the future. So they might want this higher consumption, but they have to give up leisure time. When you look at the wage rate, you'll notice the wage rate is increasing, and workers will want to work more hours up to a point, though. And this is where the backward bending supply curve comes involved. Because up to a point, workers will want to work more hours, but it comes to a point where they don't want to work more hours because they're exhausted from working those additional hours. When we look at equilibrium in the perfectly competitive labor market, you'll notice that the wages that firms will hire will be the same throughout, and that's important to note. So firms are going to hire each worker at the same wage rate. So if you look right here, here's the market graph for labor, but we're going to hire all of our workers at the same wage rate. That's a perfectly competitive labor market, hiring all workers at the same wage rate. When a firm has a monopoly power in the product market of how they hire workers, you'll notice that the price is greater than the marginal revenue. When we look at this graph, it'll look like a monopolistically competitive graph, but you'll notice that the marginal product of labor, workers are more productive than the revenue that they bring in. How will a firm have monopoly power? A firm has monopoly power in a perfectly competitive firm because of the elastic supply curve. The firm will hire units of labor until the marginal revenue product is equal to the marginal resource cost of labor. If you look right here, you'll look at this graph, you'll notice in the market they set the wages at this rate, and the wages will equal this amount right here in the market. Now, let's go to Chapter 13. 13 is looking at income distribution in a market economy, and it's determined primarily by ownership of the factors of production. Another way to describe income distribution is looking at how income is divided. Is it equally or unequally among individuals or households? The measure is called the personal distribution of income. When we look at the Lorenz curve, this is a very good curve to show the percentage of income received by all percentages of households. Now let's look at this Lorenz curve right here. This is a perfect distribution of income in our economy, which means 20% of households earn 20% of the income. The problem is, you'll notice that this is an unequal distribution. The farther we get away from this equal distribution, the more unequal our economy is. That means more and more households earn very low percentage. So 60% of the workers only earn 30% of the income. That's much more unequal than what we expected. So the Lorenz curve shows the unequal distribution of income in our economy. When we can measure this using the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient is a quick measure of inequality, and it's the area between the diagonal and the Lorenz curve. And the ratio of this area is the whole triangle below the diagonal, called the Gini coefficient. The Gini coefficient takes on values between 0 and 1. Now, if all people have equal income shares, the Lorenz curve will lie along the diagonal. Gini coefficient will be 0. Now, if one person has all the income and everyone else has nothing, the Lorenz curve will lie along the horizontal axis and the right vertical axis. So it will have a value of 1. So when it's equal distribution, it will equal 0. And the farther or the larger it gets, the more unequal it is. Now, how do we interpret the Lorenz curve? The Lorenz curve describes the relative distribution of income among households. A Lorenz curve might show that the lowest 20% of households receive only 5% of the income, but it doesn't say if this amount of income is high or low. Second, Lorenz curve shows how income is distributed among households at a given time. So if the households in the lowest 10% change over time, Lorenz curve will be an incorrect picture of relative poverty. Measuring poverty. The U.S. government first established an official definition of poverty in 1964. And in 1964, they said a family of 4 was in poverty was $3,000 or below. Now the threshold is about $23,000 for a family of 4, which is very low if you think about it. The poverty rate is a rather crude measure of poverty, or changes of poverty, because this number gives no indication of how poor people are. Now, income redistribution in the United States and many other countries have been carried out by both the private sector and the public sector. Income redistribution is another activity by which the public benefits produced at least in part by the private sector through charitable organizations. Private redistribution alone is not likely to achieve this desired level of income transfers. When we look at Social Security was a government transfer program where the government provided support to the people that were in need. And the people that were in need were people that were entitled to the program at a certain age. Social Security payments are financed by a tax on workers and employers. Currently, each pay an equal amount. Workers do not have a choice about participating, but when we look at micro theory, you'll see that at least part of the half of the taxes paid by employers is actually borne by the workers. So when we look at Social Security program, it's a very important program as an entitlement program where the government transfers money from individuals and businesses from the government to individuals and businesses. When we look at unemployment compensation, this is another program that the government looks at. Unemployment compensation is a transfer program financed by a tax on employers and administered by the states. They set benefit levels and eligibility. Costs are shared between the states and the federal government. Unemployment compensation is tended to be temporary replacement of loss of income. But the problem is unemployment compensation can be a long-term problem in our economy. These are some of the concepts that we're going to be focusing on this week. If you need any additional help or resources, please let me know, but I look forward to your effort.